Dear students, this is going to be a long lecture because here I intend to talk about different methods that are used in cultural studies. Hence, I have titled it as Cultural Studies Methods. Since it is going to be a very long discussion, so what I'm going to do is that I will divide it into two videos. I'll be talking about a few methods in this first video, and then I will talk about a few methods in the next video. Cultural studies, my dear students, adapts methods of analysis from different fields. It adopts its methods from media studies, from cultural anthropology, from discourse analysis, from popular culture theories, and from audience studies. So most of these methods that are used by cultural studies are heavily loaded with theories. Friends, cultural studies believes that we cannot read cultural artifacts only within the realms of aesthetics. I hope you will also agree that in our previous discussions we tried to establish the point that culture in cultural studies is not simply limited to looking at it in an aesthetic sense or in an aesthetic way only. So that's why I am saying that cultural studies believes that we cannot read the cultural artifacts only within the realm of aesthetics. Let us try to understand this hypothesis. What hypothesis? That we cannot read cultural artifacts within the realm of aesthetics. Suppose this is a hypothesis, and let us try to understand this hypothesis by taking an example from literature. A novel must be read not only within its generic conventions and the history of novel, but it also be read in terms of the publishing industry and its profits, the community of reviewers, the academic field of literary criticism, the politics of awards, and the hype and the publicity machinery that creates a hype and for the sale of the book. So we cannot delink a literary work from the gigantic publicity mechanism that is in operation around a book. So when we buy a book, say for example, when we buy a novel, we do not buy a novel only, we do not buy a book only, rather we actually buy a whole enterprise. By reading the Harry Potter series, for example, we do not just consume a story of a growing up boy wizard, but we are actually consuming the entire merchandise that is involved around the publication of Harry Potter. So, my dear friends, cultural studies asks certain questions. It asks that why does a particular artifact or event or activity mean to a community or a nation or a culture? I repeat, cultural studies asks that what does not why does, what does a particular artifact, a cultural event, or an activity mean to a community, a nation, or a culture. It also asks that how does a cultural artifact generate meaning in and for a community? How does a cultural artifact generate meaning in and for a community? For example, what does the tricolor or the Gandhi Jayanti celebration or a cricket match means to Indian? What do these things stand for? How does the audience in India react to these symbols, the tricolor, events, Gandhi Jayanti, actions, a cricket match? What is their value? What is their value? The tricolor or Gandhi Jayanti or a cricket match is seen as a visible sign of scripted by a culture or community called India. This Gandhi Jayanti or tricolor or a cricket match is seen as a visible sign scripted by a culture or community called India. They are seen as visible political signs which either carry mask or reinforce certain ideological values in India. They are part of a discourse that is India. The discourse that is India. The discourse of national identity. The discourse of national territory. The discourse of national leader. The discourse of national pride. The discourse of patriarchal ideas, the discourse of nationalism, all these things can be woven around the tricolor, the Gandhi Jayanti celebration, or for example, a cricket match. So these events, cricket match, Gandhi Jayanti celebration, or the symbol, the tricolor, these things create a discourse revolving around national identity, national territory, national leader, national pride, patriarchal national structure, nationalism, etc. etc. So, what cultural studies does is to interpret signs of culture, as we were mentioning just now, as a part of power struggle to acquire, maintain, or contest meanings. To acquire, maintain, or contest meanings. The critique component of cultural studies. There is a critique component also. So the critique component of cultural studies explores the political significance of such things. What they mask, what they hide, what they gloss, what they reinforce, etc. etc. So friends, cultural studies actually studies the language in and through which meanings are made in a particular culture. Cultural studies studies the language in and through which meanings are made in a particular culture. It questions how such things reflect the power struggle within a culture. And it also explores how certain meanings are privileged in that culture at the cost of some other meanings. So, with this background, let us start a discussion on methods of cultural studies. And as I said, let me remind you that this is going to be a long discussion, so that is why I am dividing it into two videos. I'll be talking about a few methods in this video and a few methods I will take up in the next. Friends, but before we discuss the methods used in cultural studies, let us begin with a question. Let us take the two keywords methods and methodology, and let us put up a question in front of ourselves, that are these two things same? I mean, methods and methodology, is it same? No, both are not same. Method and methodology are two different things, my dear friends. Method is the technique employed by the researcher to frame questions, collect data, organize the data. Thus, method refers to the actual fieldwork, questionnaires, databases, and the identifying sources, whereas methodology refers to the political position and the interpretive strategy used by the researcher. Methodology refers to the epistemological approach, the concerns, the philosophical, political approach of the researcher, whereas where the researcher scrutinizes his or her own location. Methodology is the critical approach used to interpret the data collected. For example, if you are studying the representation of women in Indian Parliament, let us take this example and let us try to differentiate what method is and what methodology is on the basis of this example. When you are studying the representation of women in Indian Parliament, the method will be to organize the questionnaire, to decide about the people to interview, to conduct the interview, and to collect the data. And what will be the methodology? The methodology would be identifying your own ideology. Whether you are a Marxist and you are a feminist, this will certainly affect a lot in your analysis of the data, right? So methodology is identifying your ideology, reflecting upon your ideas or experiences before framing the questions, interpreting the collected data based on your assumptions. So look here, you collect questionnaire, you prepare questionnaire, and preparation of the questionnaire is a part of the method. But while preparing the questionnaire, if you are driven by a particular ideology, and your ideology and your ideas are reflected, your experiences are reflected in the framing of the questions of that questionnaire, this is methodology. When you are collecting the data, doing the interview, deciding about the persons for interview, doing the interview is a part of method. Collecting the data is a part of method. But when you are interpreting the data, collected data, and in this interpretation of the collected data, your ideology comes, your ideas comes, your experiences come. So when your ideology interfere into this interpretation of the data, when your ideas interfere into the collection of this in the interpretation of the collected data, or when your experience starts interfering in the interpretation of the collected data, this is methodology. So friends, I hope you will agree with me that no data is innocent, and I am saying this with all honesty, that no data is neutral. These are all very useless claims, very useless claims, बेकार की बातें हैं जब ये दावा किया जाता है कि data is very neutral. No data is neutral, my dear friends. No data is innocent, my dear friends. And no researcher is neutral. No researcher is, what you can say, objective and neutral. The researcher and the data has always been driven by the ideology. It has always been driven by the interpretation of the researcher, right? So, cultural studies is about power. Once again, listen to me. Cultural studies is about power. From here, we are beginning our discussion on proper discussion on methods, right? So, cultural studies, my dear friends, is about power. It studies how power informs all acts of cultural production and meaning generation. Therefore, it is important to realize the positions the researcher and the object occupy. Listen, look here. This is what I was telling, that it is important to realize the positions the researcher and the object occupy. And it is also important that the power relations, what are the power relations between them? The power relations between the researcher and the object of research. It has to be kept in mind that what? Listen, it has to be kept in mind that what gives us, as matlab researchers, what gives us the authority to use people or communities as our source material to study their culture. Yeah? So it has to be kept in mind that what gives the researcher the authority to use people or communities as their source material to study their culture. It has also to be kept in mind that what is the relationship between the knower, Knower, the researcher. So it has to be kept in mind that what is the relationship between the researcher, the knower, and the known, the object of study. So what is the relation between the knower and the known? It has also to be kept in mind that what is the location from which the researcher is asking the questions or making the analysis. Location here does not necessarily mean place. Location is that where the researcher is located, his ideology, his thought process, his thinking, his beliefs, his faith, the political frame to which he belongs, etc., right? So what is the location from which the researcher is asking the questions and making the analysis? So that has also to be kept in mind. Friends, one of the basic assumptions of cultural studies is that cultural artifacts cannot be studied independent of the social and material contexts. Cultural artifacts cannot be studied independent of the social and material context. Let us try to understand this once again with the help of an example. For example, the representation of women in parliament or the representation of women in cinema is therefore located in the actual context of gender oppression, violence against women, patriarchy, economic inequalities, etc. So friends, cultural studies is more interested in the way meanings are made and the discourses within which these meanings are made. Two things. Cultural studies is more interested in the ways meanings are made, number one, and it is more interested in the discourses within which these meanings are made. Cultural studies, my dear students, investigates intensively the production of meaning. Cultural studies investigates intensively the production of meaning rather than involving itself in extended observations. The idea is not to merely accumulate data, but to ask questions of epistemology and politics of the data that has been produced. The question of epistemology and the politics of the data that has been produced. Now, at this juncture, let us begin with a very important method that is used in cultural studies. And this method is called as the circuit of culture. And within this, my dear friends, within this heading, circle of culture, we will be talking about various subheadings, various submethods. Maybe we will talk some methods and some submethods in this video, and some methods and submethods in another video, as I said earlier. So let us begin with a discussion of the circuit of culture. Friends, in 1997, Paul Duguay and his associates gave this concept. Which concept? The circuit of culture. They said that a sophisticated analysis of cultural artifacts requires a close examination of 5 basic elements. Duguay and his associates, while evolving this phrase circuit of culture, they said that a sophisticated analysis of cultural artifacts requires a close examination of 5 basic elements. What are those 5 basic elements, my dear friends? 1. Representation. 2. Identity. 3. Production. 4. Consumption. And 5. Regulation. I repeat. Representation, number 1. Identity, number 2. Production, number 3. Consumption, number 4. And regulation, number 5. So these are the 5 basic elements which are required for a sophisticated cultural analysis, or a sophisticated cultural analysis of the cultural artifacts for a close examination, right? So friends, these 5 elements, I repeat, representation, identity, production, consumption, and regulation. These elements together constitute the circuit of culture. These elements constitute the circuit of culture. These elements present a process through which every cultural artifact or object or event must pass. Every cultural object, every cultural artifact, or every cultural event pass through these 5 elements: representation, identity, production, consumption, and regulation. Friends, let us talk about representation. And let us talk about all these 5 elements actually: representation, identity, what I was talking about, production, consumption, and regulation. All these 5 elements let us talk about this. Let us try to understand these five elements with reference to television. So, television and representation. What does the television represent and how it is represented? What does the television represent and how it is represented? Friends, the answers to these questions will basically discuss the centrality of representation in a culture. So let us try to answer this. When we try to answer these two questions, what does the television represent and how it is represented? When we try to answer these two questions, we will be basically discussing the representation of the centrality of representation in a culture. Friends, television represents communication. I hope you will agree. Television represents information and television represents entertainment. Right? So representation was one point, basic element, and I said that any cultural artifact, any cultural event, any cultural object can be assessed through this concept of basic element of representation. So television represents communication, television represents information, and television represents entertainment. Let us now, my dear friends, come to the question of television and identity. And once again begin with a question. What kind of identity does television project? What is the difference between the state television and the private television? The television owned by the state and the private channels. So, what kind of identity does television project? What is the difference between programs shown by the state television and the programs shown by the private channels? What kind of age group is targeted in a particular kind of program? Or for example, a promotional advertisement. So what kind of age group is targeted in a particular kind of promotional material? For example, a promotional material related to a car or a promotional material related to a mobile set or a cell phone, what promotional material targets the age group through the promotional material of fashion items, for example, and what age group is targeted in a promotional material of consumables, for example. So what kind of identity are given importance in television serials? This is another important question. It's not necessary that we will try to answer everything here in this video. These are questions for you. So what kinds of identity are given importance in a television soap, in a television serial? For example, family is given importance, young professionals are given importance, youth are given importance, or the business community is given importance. Next thing, what does it mean to appear on television? What does it mean for you when you try to appear, or when you appear, or when you desire to appear on television? So what does it mean to appear on television? Is the identity of a public figure or an intellectual is governed by appearance on a program? We find a lot of public figures, a lot of writers, intellectuals, and nowadays even religious persons, religious thinkers and authorities, etc. Right? So, is the identity of a public figure or an intellectual is governed by the appearance on a program? Friends, think about the so-called serious programs on current affairs and the kind of intellectuals that are invited for the debate and discussion. Think about a serious television channel that broadcast that telecast a program on contemporary affairs, and what kind of intellectuals are brought there. And the second thing is that who is the or what is their target audience for these programs, what is their target audience for these programs. So let us talk about a bit about all these in Indian context. So, for example, what is the Indian identity, the national Indian identity projected on television? And when our news channels and television channels uh, does not do not take care about the marginalized, because for them the mainstream media, the mainstream people, the majoritarian population is their target audience. And in this target audience, with regard to this target audience, they least bother about the minority population or the marginalized groups. So, what is the national identity, the Indian national identity that is projected on television? And a question, a very serious question I am putting in front of you: does the Northeast come into the picture of discussion? The Northeast of India? Does every region of India is projected honestly and presented honestly in our television channels? Does the Dalit or the minority come into discussion, for example? And if your answer is yes, in what way? In what way? Where, how these Dalits, how these marginalized people, how the Northeast, how Kashmir, how the southern India, how Kerala has been brought into the debate? What is the tone of such programs in which the Dalits, the minorities, the Northeast, Kashmir, and Kerala is discussed? है ना? So, what is the tone of such programs that try to give representation and a space to the marginalized? Friends, isn't it all a matter of identity? Now, let us move on to the third element, production. And let us once again, as I said, we'll be discussing all these elements in the light of television. So let us once again discuss television and production. And again, questions. Who are the major television manufacturers? Television manufacturers, the set, the TV set. I'm not talking about the channels and the programs. So who are the major television manufacturers? What are their policies, the employment policies of those factories which produce television, manufactures television? So, what are their policies? How is the recruitment done? What welfare policies those television max and manufacturing factories and units offer for their workers? How much profit does the company make? Does the company project a domestic work culture, or it follows an international work culture. Does the company make a project a democratic work culture, or it follows a very autocratic corporate like work culture? How does the management of the company mixes with the workers? Does the company address the Indian ethos? Does the company addresses the Indian milieu? Friends, these are all questions that will make you understand the basic element called production. Let us now move on to another basic element, and that is consumption. And again, let us evaluate this consumption also in the light of television. So, who are the buyers of the television sets? Who are the buyers of television sets? And when they are buyers, what types of sets are bought? By which economic class? What are their income level? What would you buy? Why would you buy a particular model? What is your idea behind? What is your preference behind selecting to purchase a particular model? So, what would you buy? Why would you buy a particular model? Is the choice of a particular brand or a model is dictated by fashion or taste or functionality? So this is a question. Is the choice of a particular brand or a particular model is dictated by fashion or taste or functionality? Do you simply want to upgrade your models because you are a television enthusiast? Do you want to upgrade your models because you can afford it? So these are the questions related to television and consumption and the basic concept of consumption in media and in cultural studies. So now let us move on to regulation, another basic element, regulation. And again, with reference to television. We are trying to understand it with reference to television. So, time and again you must have heard that the government has banned such and such television channel. Fashion TV, for example, was banned by the government of India. So, why it is banned? This comes under the question of regulation. What does the government do with regard to representation or production or consumption? With reference to production also, with reference to consumption also, and with reference to representation also. So with regard to the manufacturing of the TV sets, with regard to the sale of the TV sets, right, and with regard to the programs, the representation of the TV sets, regulation comes. So what does the government do with regard to representation, production and consumption? What is the role of the censor board, for example, if there is any? So what is the role of that censor board? What is the role of the concerned ministry, for example, Information and Broadcasting Ministry in India? So what is the role of that particular ministry with regard to the sale of television, with regard to the production of television, the sale of television and the programs shown on television? So this circuit of culture, can you feel now? Can you understand now? This circuit of culture is the most thorough examination of any cultural artifact. Now, let us talk about the key areas that cultural studies today adopts to understand the modes of production of meaning. I'm going to talk about, now I'm going to talk about the key areas which the cultural studies of today adopts to understand the modes of production of meaning. And these are, let us highlight first and then we'll be talking about it one by one in detail. So these key areas are: number one, language and discourse; number two, identity; number three, everyday life; number four, ethnography; number five, media studies; number six, reception and audience studies; and number seven, cultural intermediaries. ये क्या है? What are these? These are the key elements, the key areas that the cultural studies today adopts to understand the modes of production of meaning. What are these key areas? Let me repeat once again. Language and discourse, identity, everyday life, ethnography, media studies, reception and audience studies, cultural intermediaries. Friends, we will be talking about a few of these key elements in this lecture, and we will be talking about more of these key elements in the next lecture. But let us at this juncture begin with the first key element: language and discourse. How this language and discourse is important for the production of meaning. How it forms, how it works, how language and discourse works as a key area in the production of meaning. Friends, Raymond Williams, I hope you know this name now. So Raymond Williams gave a very epochal definition of culture. And in that epochal definition by Raymond Williams about culture and society, of course, much of the cultural studies, theories, etc., much of the base of cultural studies is there. It is valid. It is. You can find it there in that statement by Raymond Williams. Friend, it is a very long statement. I am trying to quote it, read it out slowly for you. I begin with the statement by Raymond Williams. Our description of our experience comes to compose a network of relationships, and all our communication systems, including the arts, are literally parts of our social organization. Since our way of seeing is literally our way of living, the process of communication is in fact the process of community. The offering, the reception, and comparison of new meanings leading to the tensions and achievements of growth and change, unquote. Friends, as Williams says, experience is central to the project of cultural studies. Experience is central to the project of cultural studies. Experience, especially in terms of everyday life. is a central political and analytical category in itself. Let us, my dear friends, understand the relation between language and cultural studies in a graded manner. Studying society, my dear friends, is about culture also. When you are trying to study society, you are actually trying to study culture. So, studying society is about culture also. It's not only about the economics of the society only, it's not about the politics of the society only. When you are trying to study the society, it is about studying the culture also. Meaning, rather meanings and values and their exchange or circulation constitute a particular culture or community. Friends, communication creates community. Vice versa also. Community creates communication. So meanings and values and their exchange or circulation constitutes a particular culture or a particular community. And hence I said that communication creates community. A society's meaning and values, the values of a society and the meanings of a society reflect its economic and political systems. The meanings of a society, the values of a society reflect its economic and political system. Hence, to study meaning is to study culture. To study meaning is actually to study culture. Culture is about the role of meaning in any society. Listen and try to understand. Culture is about the role of meaning in any society. A culture is the sharing of meaning. A culture is the sharing of meaning. And you know, all of us know, meanings are never fixed. They are arrived at. Meanings are never fixed and they are arrived at through a process of negotiation and exchange. Meanings are never fixed and they are arrived at through a process of negotiation and exchange. Hence, cultural studies analyzes the process through which certain meanings are produced in a particular culture. It believes that the process of meaning production are connected to the structures of power in society. The processes of production of meaning, the various processes of the production of meaning are connected to the structure of power in the society. So that is why certain meanings acquire greater power because of their sources. Certain meanings acquire greater power than other meanings because of their sources. So, my dear friends, meanings are processes of language. Meanings are processes of language. And language here means not just words. Look here. Language here means not just words or the printed or the spoken word, but also speech, painting, photography. Language here means not just words printed, but words spoken, and even the painting and even the photography. So, hence, in cultural studies, the preferred term to speak about meaning is representation. Representation is the term. Representation is the word. Representation is the key word. Representation is the catchword. So, in cultural studies, the preferred term to speak about meaning is representation. Representation, my dear friends, is the process of signifying. Representation is the process of signifying the things. Signifying. You know, we were talking about signifier and the signified. This is a theory in linguistics. This is a theory in media studies also. So, representation is the process of signifying. You know? So, this is the generation of meaning. When you signify, you generate meaning. When you signify something through representation, you generate meaning. Representation presents the world in such a way that we can understand it. Representation present the world in such a way that we can understand it. But my dear friends, do remember that representation can also not be innocent. Anyways, let us move ahead. So this representation, and what is this representation? Representation can be an image. Representation can be a word, a sound, or a concept. So it uses these signs. Representation uses these signs. What signs? The image, the word, the sound, or the concept. So it uses these signs in order to generate meaning. Representation is the alphabet of culture. है ना बहुत मजेदार चीज. It's very interesting. Representation is the alphabet of culture. You know, alphabets are used to make meaningful words and meaningful sentences. We know that. And hence language takes into shape. And if, my dear friends, representation is the alphabet of culture, it is language. It is language. So let us take two formula. Word plus concept behind the meaning is sorry. Word plus concept behind the word is equal to meaning. I repeat. Concept plus word plus concept behind the word. Word plus concept behind the word is equal to meaning. The next formula is word, concept, meaning, context is equal to representation. Listen to me carefully once again. I'm repeating. Word plus concept behind the word is equal to meaning. But what is representation? Word plus concept plus meaning plus context is equal to representation. So, even you will agree with me, my dear friends, now that language is also not innocent. Language is also not neutral. Language is also, my dear friends, not transparent. Language and meaning are connected to issues of class, power, ideology, and the material conditions in which the speaking or the painting or the interpretation occurs. So, all expressions and all use of language are situated in a context. All expressions and all use of language are situated in a context, and this context is called discourse. What is discourse? The expressions, the use of language which is situated in a context. This context is called discourse. So let's define discourse once again. Discourse, my dear friends, is the context in which a culture's communication, meaning production, and interpretation occurs. Discourse is the context in which a culture's communication, meaning production, and interpretation occur. It is the terrain of thought and expression. Discourse is the terrain of thought and expression. Friends, for cultural studies, everything in society is language. Listen. For cultural studies, everything in the society is language. Objects and events are also signs within a language system that can be interpreted by people who share a similar cultural code. I repeat. For cultural studies, everything in the society is language. Objects and events are also signs within a language system that can be interpreted by people who share a set of cultural codes. So, cultural studies sees culture as a text made of signs and a text that is generating meaning. So cultural studies see culture as a text which is made up of signs and which is generating meaning. Hence, cultural studies makes use of theories from structuralism, from linguistics, to speak about the textuality of culture. Structuralism and the linguistic theories are basically used as the base theories in cultural studies to speak about the textuality of culture. A text, or text क्या है? Everything that is there in the culture is a text, right? So every artifact, every event, every object is a text. A text is read for the signs within itself. SIGNS. So a text is read for the signs within itself. A text is related to and read within the context of another text. A text is related to and read within the context of another text. And a text is finally related to and read within a larger cultural text. Let us now try to generate a discourse on the basis of this. And let us take the example of a doll, DOLL, doll. So for us, we are trying to generate a discourse now, and our text is doll. Our another text is a screwdriver. A screwdriver. So a doll and a screwdriver. We are taking these two as our texts and we are trying to create a discourse. Let us see how what it happens and how it happens. Dolls are objects given to girls. We are creating a discourse. Dolls are objects given to girls. Screwdrivers or any tool, so to say, are objects given to boys. Dolls are given to girls rather than to boys. Another discourse. Dolls are given to girls rather than to boys. Screwdrivers are given to boys rather than to girls. Girls, being more delicate, must be given softer and harmless things. Girls, being more delicate, must be given softer and harmless things. Boys, being tougher, must be given or can be given harder objects. Dolls are harmless, soft, and gentle. Screwdrivers or any tool are hard and possibly dangerous. Dolls are to be cared for, groomed, pampered. Tools are used to achieve certain goals. Tools are used to achieve certain results. Used to repair, used for construction, etc., etc. Grooming and care are feminine qualities or jobs. Grooming and care are feminine qualities or jobs. Repairs and constructions are male jobs and responsibilities. Dolls inculcate these feminine qualities of care and grooming in girls, and tools inculcate masculinity in boys. देखा आपने? A discourse, a whole discourse has been created with these two texts. All these will surely result in the main discourse now. And let us come to the main discourse out of this discourse that we have generated. So all these discourses which we have generated will result in the main discourse. And what is that main discourse? That girls are delicate and weaker, that grooming and care are feminine qualities and duties. So this is the discourse generated. You can very well, my dear friends, understand that these discourses are patriarchal and they treat women as weaker, gentler, and requiring protection, to be given only a specific particular kind of tasks, not to be given the dangerous kind of tasks. The discourses decide what is suitable for the boys and what is suitable for the girl. The discourses decide what is suitable for the men and what is suitable for the women. The discourses decide what is suitable for such and such caste and what is not suitable for such and such caste. The discourses decide what is suitable for the mainstream majoritarian population and what is not suitable for the mainstream majoritarian population. What is suitable for the marginalized, for the other, and what is not suitable for them. So how now we can conclude our reading of these two texts. The two texts, what are the two texts? The dolls and the tools. Let us now conclude. Text क्या था हमारा? What was the text? Toys and tools, screwdriver and dolls. Language क्या था हमारा? What was the language? Meaning of these texts: dolls feminine, tools masculine. डिस्कोर्स क्या निकल करके आया? व्हाट वाज द डिस्कोर्स दैट वी delivered? What was the discourse that we reached to? Patriarchy and gender difference. Patriarchy and gender difference. So apart from this, if you look at this discourse once again, we learn something this extra out of this. What? That we cannot give a doll to a girl unless we know the conventions. We cannot give a doll to a girl unless we know the conventions. And Sunu, listen to me carefully again. We cannot define the feminine without knowing the masculine. We cannot define the feminine, है ना? We cannot define the feminine without knowing the masculine. So the feminine or the feminine is what? Something which is not masculine is feminine. ये discourse generate, this is what we create. Something which is not man is a woman. Something which is not masculine is a feminine. So therefore, the definition of meaning, the definition and meaning of the term feminine or feminine is dependent upon its contrast with the term masculine. So here comes the game of binaries. The definition and the meaning of the term feminine or feminine is dependent upon its contrast with the term masculine. In order to understand one, we need to understand the other. We need to understand the opposite. So meaning is the result of difference. Are you getting the point? Meaning is the result of difference, where the meaning of feminine or feminine is only available in its difference from masculine. In short, we cannot say that there is a complete or true feminine because its meaning is dependent upon masculine. Friends, let us now move ahead. There is no essential meaning, and all meaning is the result of this relationship with the opposite or the other. There is no essential meaning of a word, and all meaning is actually the result of this relationship with its opposite or the other. This insight is taken from post-structuralism, and it is very crucial for cultural studies because it suggests three things. Four rather, let me count. Four, yeah, it generates, it suggests this insight. What insight? That meaning, there is no essential meaning, and all meaning is the result of the relationship with its opposite. As I said, it is a post-structural concept from post-structuralism. So it is crucial for cultural studies, and it suggests four things. One, all meaning is relational. All meaning is relational. Number one. Number two, all representation. Representation means signs and meaning together. So all representation is based on difference. Number three, all representation is a system of negotiation where meaning contests for visibility and expression. I repeat, all representation is a system of negotiation where meanings contest for visibility and expression. This context is situated within a discourse. Number four, this contest is situated within a discourse. For example, dolls represent femininity in a culture. it acquires meaning, and the term feminine or feminine because, sorry, it acquires meaning and the term feminine becomes represented through certain signs. What are those signs? Doll, care, grooming, soft, gentle. So these are the terminologies, right? These are the feminine terminologies, you can say. Now, friends, let us now move on to identity. Another very important circuit of culture, another very important method, identity. For cultural studies, the identity of a person is dependent upon the roles played by that person. The signs that designate that person. So, identity is constituted through experience. Identity is constituted through experience. Representation is a significant part of experience. Experience, friends, includes the consumptions of signs, the making of meaning from signs, and the knowledge of meaning. However, experience also masks the connection between different structures in the society. We do not always understand what we are not in control of our lives. When we are unable to understand that we are not in control of our lives, somebody else is controlling us. You know, we sometimes we think that we are very independent, we are in control of our life, but the fact of the matter is very different. We do not always understand that we are not in control of our lives and that we are only subject to ideological control. We are only subject to ideological control. So, experience often makes us believe that we are free. You know, experience often makes us believe that we are free agents when we are in reality the victims of a dictatorial or a discursive and an ideological regime that treat us as consumers. है ना, ये regime कहीं और बैठा है. This ideological dictatorial discursive regime is sitting somewhere else. If it is a religious regime, it is sitting somewhere else. If it is a political regime, it is sitting somewhere else. If it is an ideological regime, an economic regime, it is sitting somewhere else. And we are mere puppets in the hand of these ideological regimes. So the power of choice, हम लोग कहते हैं ना, we say that we have a lot of choices, this and that. This power of choice is an illusion. This power of choice is an illusion generated through the regimes, generated through representation by the regimes. The girls, my dear friends, assimilate the qualities of the feminine because they are brought up within that discourse of femininity. The girls assimilate the qualities of the feminine because they are brought up within that ideological discourse of femininity. The values of culture inculcate the notion of masculinity or femininity among children. The relation between genders are therefore set. Everything is fixed. Everything is fixed. Nothing is there in your hands. The whole match is fixed, my dear friends. So the relation between genders is therefore fixed. The discourse of femininity determines the power relations between gender. Or say the discourse of femininity and masculinity generates and determines the power relations between gender. So, dear friends, identity is the consequence. Yes, identity is the consequence of representation and the effect of discourse. Identity is based on location within a system of relationship and discourses. Identity is, I repeat, based on the location within a system of relationship and discourses. Identity, my dear friends, is socially produced. Identity, my dear friends, is socially constructed. All right. So closely related to identity, closely related to the concept of identity, we have the question of agency. We have the question of agency. Agency, what is agency? Agency is the capacity and power to determine one's action and life. Closely related to identity, we have the question of agency. And what is agency? Agency is the capacity and power to determine one's action and one's life. It is also socially produced. The agency is also socially produced. An individual's ability to act is limited by the contexts in which he or she lives. An individual's ability to act is limited by the contexts in which he or she lives. There is a key debate in cultural studies. Who are the empowered agents in any culture? This is the key debate. Who are the empowered agents in any culture? Who determines the limits of an individual's freedom? Who determines कि आप कितनी देर तक और कितनी दूर तक आज़ाद हैं और कितनी देर और कितनी दूर तक और उसके बाद आज़ाद नहीं हैं? So who determines the limits of an individual's freedom? What are the consequences of an individual's action in any culture? So this is a very key debate in cultural studies. Representation, my dear friends, representation is the generation of meaning and it constitutes identity. Representation generates meaning and representation constitutes identity. And identity, my dear friends, determines the degree of agency that one possesses or one does not possess. Identity determines the degree of agency that one possesses or one does not possess. So agency is therefore the consequence of representation also. Agency is the consequence of representation also. Summing up the debate here for today, for this lecture, for this video, discourse and representations determine an individual's identity. It determines the individual's agency and actions. I repeat, discourse and representations determine an individual's identity, agency, and action. Discourses are, my dear friends, discourses are structures of power that generate particular meanings and identities. So in any culture, it is crucial to see as to which class or classes, as to which group or groups control the discourses. It is very important. In any culture, it is very important, it is very crucial to note as to which class or classes or which group or groups control the discourses. The same class or classes, the same group or groups have powers to determine identities and agencies. So that is all for this video. We will be talking about methods further in the next video. In the next video, we will talk about everyday life as a very important method of cultural studies. We will talk about post-colonialism and cultural studies as an important method. We will talk about cultural intermediaries as an important method. We will also talk about media and cultural studies as an important method. We will talk about audience and reception studies as an important method. We will discuss all this in our next video. Presently, thank you so much.